It started with a locked recipe box and my mother's final, shaking handwriting delivering a message that should have been etched into steel, not hidden under a stack of 30-year-old church cookbooks. Before the month was out, my sister Rachel would be standing in front of a probate judge, and a year after that, she'd be trimming my hedges in a canvas apron that read, "Planted Lies," while a trolley full of tourists snapped photos. I'm going to walk you through every step of how a forgery disguised as sisterly concern unraveled into the most satisfying property fraud prosecution our historic district has ever seen, and how I ended up sitting on the wraparound porch of a Victorian I never thought I'd own outright again. I was 52 years old when my mother passed, and I'd spent the last 20 of those years as her full-time caregiver. Not a weekend daughter, not a holiday visitor, not someone who threw money at the problem while complaining about Mom being difficult. I was the one who drained her 401k to retrofit the downstairs bathroom with a walk-in tub, the one who learned to administer subcutaneous fluids during her final 6 months, the one who slept on a cot in the living room so I'd hear the monitoring alarm when her oxygen levels dipped. I'd been a bookkeeper for a small masonry company before all this, the kind of woman who could balance a 6-figure operating budget in 50 minutes flat and spot a misplaced decimal from across the room. That skill is exactly what saved me later, but first I had to survive the quiet erosion of being the family's invisible infrastructure, a role Rachel had never once acknowledged beyond a breezy, "You're so strong, Lena," at Christmas. My sister Rachel was the golden child who escaped. She'd married a sales manager named Mark who treated image like oxygen. They lived in a gated subdivision 3 hours away, and their visits were performances, a bouquet of expensive flowers that wilted by Tuesday, a 2-hour stopover during which Rachel would photograph Mom from flattering angles for a social media post about honoring my incredible mother, and then a hasty exit before anything uncomfortable happened. Mom saw it clearly. In her last lucid weeks, she'd squeeze my hand and say, "Lena, you know that house holds more than bricks. I've made sure it holds you." I didn't fully understand what she meant until after the funeral. The discovery happened the day of the memorial, within hours of the last guest leaving St. Anne's reception hall. Rachel and Mark descended on Cedar Street before I'd even finished unbuttoning my black dress. They weren't there to comfort me. They were there to manage. Mark had already printed a property tax summary from the county assessor's website and was muttering something about maximizing the asset's liquidity. Rachel had a leather binder with a post-loss checklist she downloaded from a financial influencer's website, and she began directing me toward the dining room table like I was a confused client, not a grieving daughter. She moved through the house with the brittle efficiency of a woman who had no time for sentiment, opening cabinets, checking the backs of picture frames, and declaring items salvageable or estate sale material before I could catch my breath. My mother's house was in 1886 Queen Anne Victorian with a turret, a wraparound porch, original stained glass, and a new roof I'd paid for 3 years earlier by selling my own car. The mortgage still had a $65,000 balance at 4.25% fixed with a due-on-sale clause, but the county appraisal put the full market value at $280,000. Mom's will, which I'd seen and Rachel had a copy of, stated clearly that I received a life estate in the property, meaning I could live there as long as I wanted, and that Rachel would inherit only upon my death, provided she paid off that remaining mortgage within 12 months. The intent was obvious: take care of me, get the house eventually. But Rachel and Mark didn't handle obligations. They handled opportunities, and the opportunity here was a life tenant who might be coaxed into signing away her rights before she understood the value of what she was surrendering. While they occupied the dining room, I retreated to the kitchen to make tea, and that's when I saw the old recipe box on the counter, its wooden lid thick with dust. Rachel had already been pouring through the pantry, looking for anything valuable, and she must have pulled it out, flipped it open, seen nothing but index cards with apple cake and casserole recipes, and shoved it aside toward the corner. She dismissed it as garbage. "You can toss that junk box, Lena, it's just old clippings," she called over her shoulder without even looking at me. I bobbed my head in a noncommittal nod, watched her turn back to her binder, and then slid the box into my tote bag in one smooth motion, my heart thudding because I knew Rachel missed things the way a person who never bothered to look closely always does. That night, alone in the guest room of my own house, because Rachel and Mark had commandeered the primary bedroom without asking, I emptied the recipe box onto a towel. Card after card, Mom's looping cursive, her notes on sugar ratios and oven temperatures, a withered clipping from the local paper about winning a pie contest in 1997. And then at the very bottom, a folded sheet of heavy watermarked stationery, the kind she used for correspondence, not recipes. I unfolded it and recognized her handwriting immediately, though it was shakier than usual, the letters leaning forward as if she'd written it quickly and in pain. It was dated 6 weeks before her death. My hands trembled as I read. Lena, if you're reading this, I am gone and Rachel is already pushing. I know how she and Mark operate. I have heard them on speakerphone when they thought I was asleep discussing managing the estate and unlocking the equity. Do not trust them. Do not sign anything. The house is yours for your lifetime and I have taken steps. Remember the county recorder conversation we had last spring. There is a friend at the title office who will know if something moves. Keep this letter safe. It is your voice from me. Save yourself, my love. The county recorder conversation. In April, Mom had insisted I drive her to the administration building to file something she called a notice of protected tenancy. She'd been vague about the legalities, clutching a manila envelope and refusing to let me see the contents, but she was so deliberate, so focused, that I didn't press. Now, holding her letter, I realized she'd planted a landmine in the property records, a quiet declaration that any deed without my consent would be fraudulent. 4 words, do not trust them, confirmed everything I'd ever sensed about my sister's ambition, and the phrase, save yourself, landed like a command from the grave. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family loyalty should never be a blank check for betrayal. Rachel's manipulation started the very next morning. Over coffee that Mark had brewed using my French press, Rachel slid a document across the table toward me. It was a durable power of attorney form, already filled out with my name printed in the grantor space. We just want to help, sweetie, she said, using a tone so sweet it curdled my stomach. Grief brain is a real thing, and the last thing you need is paperwork. Just sign this and Mark can handle the bank, the insurance, all of it. Then you can come stay with us for a few weeks. Let us take care of you. Mark nodded gravely, his thumb already resting on the signature line of his phone's notary app, which he'd opened on the table. They had a notary ready. They expected me to sign right then, as if my grief were a 24-hour window they could exploit before my rationality returned. I looked at the form and saw the statutory warnings, the irrevocable language, the broad powers to convey real property. They weren't asking me to let them pay the electric bill. They were asking me to hand them the legal right to sell my mother's house from under me. So I did what any woman who's spent 2 decades managing a terminal patient's medication schedule knows how to do. I played foggy. I squinted at the paper, set it down, turned my cup in circles, and murmured, I need to think, Mom, I can't focus. Could we? I let my voice trail off, my eyes unfocusing the way I'd seen Moms do after a bad spell. Mark's jaw tightened, but Rachel's eyes went soft and predatory at the same time. Of course, Lena, take your time, we'll handle everything else. Why don't you pack a bag and come home with us tonight? You shouldn't be alone here. She made it sound like mercy. I made my face slack and nodded, already calculating how I could turn this captivity into an observation post. That's how I ended up living in my sister's spare bedroom, a converted garage space with a Keurig and a framed quote about blessings on the wall, while Rachel and Mark systematically took control of my life. They drove me back for the mail pickup twice a week, but Rachel always sorted the envelopes first, her fingers quick as a card sharps. I watched her palm a letter from the county tax assessor and slip it into her purse before we even got in the car. The pressure to sign ramped up daily. Rachel would sit beside me during dinner with a condescending patience, explaining that the house was a burden, that the roof would leak again, that the neighborhood was getting shaky, and that she'd found a cash buyer who could close in 30 days if I'd just let Mark handle the paperwork. It's still Mom's house, but you won't have to worry about the mortgage, and we'll make sure you're comfortable, she said. The word comfortable was a bribe wrapped in a threat, and every time she said it, I catalogued another card in the mental deck I was building against her. But I was already deep into my undercover investigation. Living in their home gave me front row access to the financial panic beneath the surface-level sheen. Rachel and Mark had borrowed heavily to maintain their image, a leased Mercedes, a kitchen renovation that stalled halfway when the contractor walked off the job, membership at a golf club they couldn't afford. I heard Mark's frantic phone calls in the middle of the night, his voice high and tight. No, I can close it by next Friday, I told you the signature is coming, he'd say, pacing the hallway in his slippers. Don't call the underwriter. I told you, I'll fund the gap myself, but I need the clear title first. The words clear title were the first piece of the puzzle clicking into place. He wasn't just planning a sale. He was trying to close a loan based on a property he didn't own freely, and the clock was ticking louder than he realized. I also noticed a pattern of dodged calls. Rachel's phone would ring, she'd glance at the screen, her face would drain, and she'd silence it. Twice I overheard her whispering in the pantry, "No, my sister is still alive, the situation is delicate." And then a sharper, "I told you, the life tenant is cooperative, she's just confused. Give me 2 more weeks." I catalogued every slip like a bookkeeper reconciling a ledger. I noted the delivery of a certified mail envelope from a law firm that Rachel immediately hid behind a sack of flour in the pantry. I knew enough from my bookkeeping days to recognize that a probate proceeding should have generated court notices, accounting inventories, a petition for formal administration. Nothing was being filed. Instead, Mark had set up a quitclaim scenario entirely outside the supervision of the surrogate's court. They were operating in the shadows, and the shadows were getting crowded. An unexpected opportunity to prove my competence and buy myself more unsupervised time arrived my 4th day in that house. A pipe under the guest bathroom sink began to leak, a slow drip that escalated into a constant hiss by noon. Rachel came into my room in a flap, saying Mark couldn't figure out how to shut it off, and the plumber couldn't come until the next day, and they'd have to turn off the whole house's water. I stood up and walked to the bathroom without a word. The angle stop valve was ancient but functional, and Rachel had been trying to turn it the wrong direction with a pair of salad tongs. I knelt down, reached into my go-bag where I kept a few of my father's old tools, a 6-inch adjustable wrench and a roll of Teflon tape, and tightened the packing nut in 3 turns. The hiss stopped. Then I turned the valve clockwise until it seeded, and the drip died immediately. Rachel stared at me like I'd performed a magic trick. "How did you?" she started. I said, "Dad taught me. You were never interested." I wiped my hands on a rag and went back to my room, and from that moment on, Rachel and Mark started treating me less like a fragile invalid and more like a useful, docile relative who could handle small household crises, which meant they relaxed their watchfulness that little bit more. I stored that sliver of freedom away for later. The real break came on a Tuesday afternoon. Rachel and Mark had gone to a client appreciation golf event, leaving me alone in the house for the first extended period. I'd faked a headache that morning, claiming the weather was triggering a sinus thing, and they were so confident in my docile grief that they didn't hesitate to leave me unsupervised. The moment their taillights disappeared, I went to the home office, a room with a hollow core door and a cheap doorknob that was locked. But lockpicking is like riding a bike. When I was 16, my father, a maintenance supervisor at a textile plant, taught me how to rake a standard pin tumbler with a tension wrench and a half-diamond pick. He'd said, "You never know when a filing cabinet gets stuck and the key's lost." I still kept his old pick set in a rolled-up leather case at the bottom of my sewing kit, and I'd brought that kit to my sister's house because I'd planned for exactly this moment. I knelt beside the door, inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied light torque, and felt for the binding pin with the half-diamond. The first pin set with a soft click, then the second, then the third. I raked the pins twice, and the plug rotated 10 degrees. The lock turned with a sound like a card deck being cut. Inside, a metal filing cabinet stood against the wall, its top drawer locked with a simple wafer lock. I inserted my tension tool, scrubbed the wafers with a small hook, and the drawer slid open in under 20 seconds. Inside that drawer, I found a manila folder labeled Cedar Street Transaction. The documents inside turned my grief into cold, methodical fury. At the top was a deed of trust dated 3 weeks after Mom's death, recorded at the county recorder's office, bearing my name as the truster and Rachel's name as the beneficiary and trustee, granting her a first-position lien on the property for exactly $65,000. The signature on the truster line read Lena Calloway, but the slant of the L was wrong, the loop on the Y too wide, the downstroke of the C wobbling at the baseline. It was a clumsy forgery, the kind a junior handwriting analyst could spot in 30 seconds. Attached to it were loan application documents showing Rachel had used that forged deed of trust to secure a private money loan from a hard money lender called Velocity Capital Solutions at 12% interest, a loan that paid off the existing $65,000 mortgage I'd been dutifully paying down for years. So she'd cleared the mortgage with money borrowed against my interest, using my name as security. Then, deeper in the folder, I found a purchase agreement and a grant deed, already signed by Rachel as the successor trustee of my mother's estate, conveying the entire property to a couple named the Pattersons for $310,000. The closing statement showed a disbursement, $65,000 to pay off the hard money loan, $22,000 in agent commissions and fees, and a net disbursement to Rachel of $223,000 wired to a joint account she shared with Mark. The sale had already closed 2 days before Mom's memorial service. My life estate, my occupancy, my legal rights had been erased with a series of forged signatures and false affidavits, and the Pattersons were scheduled to take possession in 30 days. I photographed every page with my phone, careful to capture the forgery, the loan number, the notary stamp, and the recording information. Then I remembered the hidden certified mail. I went to the pantry, retrieved the envelope from behind the flour sack, and opened it carefully with a steam kettle to preserve the seal. Inside was a letter from a title company called Empire Land Title, specifically from a senior compliance officer named Denise Okonkwo. The letter was addressed to me, not Rachel, and it had been sent to the Cedar Street address but forwarded by some postal alias Rachel had set up. Denise wrote that Empire had flagged an irregularity in a recent deed recording because a notice of protected tenancy had been filed by the late owner, Margaret Calloway, in April of that year, which specifically identified me as a life tenant whose consent was required for any conveyance. The letter stated that unless Empire received notarized, in-person confirmation from me within 10 days, they would freeze the title insurance and refer the matter to the county's real estate fraud unit. That deadline was in 3 days. Rachel had intercepted this letter, desperate to suppress it until she could coerce my signature on a consent document, which would make the fraud appear consensual after the fact. The irony tasted metallic in my mouth. Mom's countermeasure was already triggering its failsafe, and all I had to do was make sure the failsafe caught my sister before she could wriggle out of it. I didn't call Denise immediately. I needed a complete, tamper-proof record of everything Rachel had done, so I used an old bookkeeper's trick to clone the contents of Rachel's files without leaving a trace. My mother had kept a portable document scanner, a Darksy Go, in her office for medical records, and I still had it in my bag. I connected it to a power bank, scanned every page of the folder, saved the PDFs to an encrypted flash drive, and then returned the folder to its exact position. I wiped the door handle, relocked the filing cabinet with my picks, and was back in my room 10 minutes before my sister's Mercedes pulled into the garage, my heart hammering but my expression placid as a wax figure. I now possessed enough evidence to trigger a federal investigation, and I had the name of the one person who was already looking for me. The ally arrived like a life raft when I called Denise Okonkwo the next morning from a burner app I downloaded the night before. I introduced myself as the life tenant referred to in the protected tenancy filing, and Denise's voice shifted instantly from professional to urgently protective. "Ms. Calloway, I've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks," she said. "We have reason to believe a fraudulent deed of trust and a subsequent grant deed were recorded without your consent, and our underwriter has already filed a suspicious activity report. The FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force has an open inquiry because the loan involved interstate wire fraud. The hard money lender's servers are in Nevada. If you can provide any original documentation proving your mother's intent and confirming the forgery, I can bring in a federal investigator this afternoon. I had my mother's letter. I had the scanned deed of trust with the forged signature. I had a notarized copy of the will that Rachel had conveniently left in the same filing cabinet. I told Denise I could meet her at a Denny's parking lot 40 minutes away, and I slipped out of the house while Rachel was on a Zoom call with her wellness coach. Denise was a sharp-eyed woman in a navy blazer who treated my evidence like a forensic examiner. She compared my mother's known signature from the protected tenancy filing to the forgery under a portable magnifying loupe, noting 6 distinct points of divergence. She confirmed the notary's commission number with the Secretary of State's database on her tablet, and verified that the notary who had supposedly witnessed my signature was a mobile notary named Cynthia Pierce, who'd been paid $300 via Zelle from Rachel's business account, a clear conflict that voided the notarization. She also pulled up a digital recording log of the deed, noting that the document had been e-recorded using a notarization platform called Notarize Pro that required 2-factor authentication from the signer, but the IP log showed the authentication came from Rachel's home Wi-Fi network, not from any device associated with me. "Your sister's not even a sophisticated criminal," Denise said, shaking her head. "She left a digital trail a mile wide, and she used her own Wi-Fi for the 2-factor. It's like robbing a bank and leaving your driver's license on the counter." Within 48 hours, I was sitting in a conference room with Denise, a postal inspector named Agent Rojas, and a prosecutor from the county's Economic Crimes Division named Adebayo. They laid out the full scale of what Rachel and Mark had done: mortgage fraud, identity theft, elder exploitation under our state's vulnerable adult statute, perjury on the false affidavit they'd filed at the recorder's office, and a federal wire fraud charge because the hard money loan funds moved through interstate banking channels. Prosecutor Adebayo explained that they could seize the property back under a lis pendens and void the sale, but to make the case airtight for jury, they needed one more piece of direct evidence, Rachel acknowledging in her own voice that she knew I hadn't signed the deed, ideally in a recorded conversation. They asked if I would be willing to wear a wire. I said yes without a second of hesitation. Mom's "save yourself" echoed in my mind, and I knew this was the final piece. The maximum cruelty beat came before I ever pushed a record button, and it extinguished any final flicker of family loyalty I might have felt. I staged a medical collapse in Rachel's kitchen. I'd learned how to mimic a vasovagal syncope from the years of watching Mom's blood pressure crashes, how to go pale by hyperventilating silently beforehand, how to lock my knees, and then release so the drop looked authentic. I waited until Rachel was alone, no Mark, a narrow window after lunch when she was plating leftovers and humming to herself. I stood by the island, clutched my chest with a sharp gasp, and went down hard on the tile, my body going limp and my eyes fluttering half-closed. I let my head loll to the side, my arm bent unnaturally, real enough that any decent human being would dial 911. Rachel turned from the counter, her hands still holding a spatula, and for a split second her face registered genuine alarm. Then her gaze shifted to the manila folder I'd deliberately left on the corner of the island, the one containing a consent document Denise had drafted as a trap, a document that would supposedly ratify the sale and release all claims. Rachel set the spatula down carefully. She stepped around my body, careful not to touch me, her soft-soled flats making no sound, picked up the folder, checked the signature line was blank, and then walked into the office to make a phone call. I heard her voice muffled but clear through the thin wall. "Mark, she's down again. I need you to come home and help me get her signature before she wakes up. The Pattersons' lawyer is threatening a rescission and I can't lose this deal." She didn't check my pulse. She didn't call for help. She didn't even nudge me with her foot. She saw a dying woman and saw an obstacle to a closing date. I lay there for 3 more minutes until Rachel returned, saw my eyes open, and immediately switched into a performance of concern. "Oh my God, Lena, you fainted. I was just getting my phone to call the paramedics." She lied, her hand resting on her pocket where her phone, I knew from the silent screen I'd glimpsed earlier, had not received any outgoing call. I let her pull me upright, muttered something about low blood sugar and needing a banana, and filed the memory away as fuel for what came next. In that moment, my sister ceased being family in any sense that mattered. She was a defendant, and I was the prosecution's best witness. The confrontation took place 2 days later at the office of a real estate attorney Rachel had hired to clean up the title issue. A man named Gerald something who specialized in quiet title actions and had no idea he was facilitating a fraud. She told me we were going to sign a final piece of paper that would let me stay in the house forever, and that she'd even agreed to pay me $1,500 a month as a stipend out of the goodness of her heart. She drove me there herself, Mark following in a separate car, all of us dressed like we were attending a closing, me in a pressed blouse she'd insisted I wear. The office was a sleek suite on the 12th floor, with a view of the river and a conference table of polished walnut that probably cost more than my mother's entire living room set. Rachel sat me in a leather chair and placed a document in front of me. A release and indemnification agreement that, according to the fine print, would release Rachel and Mark from all liability for any claims related to the property transfer, and would certify that I had consented to the sale, with full knowledge and without coercion. The signature line at the bottom gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a tiny adhesive arrow tab already attached, pointing to where my name should go. Rachel leaned close, her perfume sharp with artificial gardenia, and whispered, "Just sign it, Lena, and we can all move on. Mom would have wanted peace, right? She wouldn't want us fighting over an old house." She pushed a pen into my hand, a heavy silver cross pen that felt cold and expensive. Mark stood by the door, arms crossed, a smug line already forming on his mouth. Gerald the attorney looked up from his notepad, his expression bland and professionally neutral, but I saw his eyes flicker toward Rachel's tense posture and then away. I set the pen down on the table with a deliberate click. I looked directly at Rachel for the first time in weeks with full clarity. No more fog, no more performance. "No," I said, just that one word, flat and final. "You planted lies, Rachel. Your pen won't harvest anything but a prison sentence." Her face contorted, confusion shifting into fury. "What are you talking about? Sign the paper, you ungrateful." She reached for my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong, and at that moment the conference room door opened. Agent Rojas walked in with the calm authority of someone who had listened to every word on the wire I was wearing, a small device nestled in the lining of my blouse. 2 county sheriff's deputies followed, their belts creaking, and behind them came Denise Okonkwo holding a printout of the forged deed. Gerald, the attorney, rose from his seat, his face suddenly ashen. "I was not aware of any. I was retained in good faith," he started, but Agent Rojas cut him off with a raised hand. "Ms. Rachel Calloway, Mark Donovan," she said, "you're under arrest for real estate fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. The wire you're wearing, Ms. Calloway, has been transmitting this entire conversation live to a federal judge who just signed the seizure warrant. The Patterson's title company has already frozen the disbursement, and Velocity Capital has been notified." Rachel screamed. She actually screamed, a raw, guttural sound of disbelief that echoed off the glass walls, and then she lunged for the release agreement as if shredding it would unmake the evidence. A deputy restrained her with practiced ease while Mark stood frozen, his phone already vibrating with a fraud alert from their bank, because the seizure warrant had frozen every account that held the proceeds of the sale. I watched my sister, so carefully put together, her hair escaping its clip, her boutique blouse pulling at the seams, being led out in handcuffs while Agent Rojas recited Miranda in a calm monotone. I didn't gloat. I didn't cry. I just sat there, hands folded, and let the machinery of justice do what I'd spent weeks quietly assembling, one forged signature at a time. The aftermath was surgical. Forensics confirmed the forgery on the deed of trust by comparing the signature to dozens of my authentic checks and documents from my bookkeeping days, a detailed report that took 3 weeks but yielded 17 points of divergence, more than enough for an indictment. The notary, Cynthia Pierce, cooperated fully with prosecutors, admitting she'd never met me and had signed the notarization at Rachel's kitchen table for a cash payment, a confession that cost her commission and led to a separate perjury charge. The Pattersons filed a lawsuit against Rachel and Mark for fraudulent inducement, and their title insurance company paid them a full refund of the purchase price while pursuing subrogation against my sister's assets. The probate court issued an order voiding both the hard money loan and the grant deed ab initio, restoring my life estate in a house free of Rachel's fraudulent encumbrance. Because the original $65,000 mortgage had been paid off with Rachel's loan, a lien now attached to Rachel's personal assets to recoup those funds, and when she couldn't repay, the court ordered the liquidation of the Mercedes, the half-renovated kitchen equity she'd foolishly used as collateral for another loan, and a hidden brokerage account Mark had opened in his mother's name. The math worked out neatly. Rachel's theft left her with nothing, and my home was secure. Rachel was convicted on 3 felony counts in a trial that lasted 6 days but felt like a lifetime: forgery, perjury for the false affidavit at the recorder's office, and grand theft of a property interest. Mark took a plea deal for conspiracy and spent 11 months in county jail, his sales career effectively over the moment the mugshot hit local news. Rachel got 2 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. But the truly memorable consequence came from a creative sentencing hearing where the judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Holloway, who owned a historic Queen Anne herself, listened to my victim impact statement about the betrayal and the attempted theft of a home that had been in the Calloway family for 4 generations. I told the court about my mother's warning, about the forged deed of trust, about the kitchen floor where Rachel stepped over my dying body without so much as a downward glance. Judge Holloway leaned forward and said, "Ms. Rachel Calloway, you attempted to uproot your sister's life from the family home, so you will be rooted to that property. As a condition of probation, you will report to 142 Chestnut Street every Saturday morning for the next 5 years, and you will perform grounds maintenance on the landscaping to the satisfaction of the property's legal occupant, Ms. Lena Calloway. Furthermore, you will wear a work apron bearing the phrase 'planted lies' at all times while doing so, to serve as a visible reminder to this community of the consequences of property fraud. The apron will be provided by the victim, and its design is subject to her approval." I had that apron made at a small embroidery shop on Broad Street the following week. Heavy canvas hunter green, with white block letters spelling "Planted Lies" across the chest, the font slightly uneven in a way that suggested a hand stamp, something inescapably personal. The first Saturday Rachel reported for duty, I watched from the porch as she pulled on the apron over her clothes, her face a mask of humiliation so pure it could have powered the whole neighborhood. A neighbor's child on a bicycle stopped, and asked why the gardener looked so sad. "She's not a gardener," I said clearly. "She's serving a sentence." The historic district walking tour, which stops right at the turret every Saturday at 10 to discuss the architecture, added a new paragraph to its brochure that season, printed in 12-point font. Controversy at 142 Chestnut. In 2023, a legal heir forged a deed to steal this home, and the current occupant, Lena Calloway, fought back and reclaimed it through probate. The perpetrator, now convicted of perjury, fulfills her court-ordered gardening duty every Saturday morning. The tour guides never mention Rachel's name aloud, but the brochure does, and the tourists crane their necks and take pictures, and sometimes a guide will point with her umbrella and say, "That lady in the apron doesn't work for tips." I sit on the porch with my coffee and watch. I'm not bitter, I'm not gleeful. I'm just present, a woman whose mother saw the storm coming and left me both an anchor and a lighthouse. The house doesn't hold just bricks. It holds the truth that some families are bonded not by blood, but by the quiet, meticulous resistance of one person who refused to sign away her self-respect. The forged deed of trust is framed in my hallway now, next to Mom's letter, a reminder that paper can be a weapon or a shield, depending on who holds the pen. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments, and if you believe that justice sometimes wears an apron, hit that subscribe button and like this video. I'll see you in the next story.